So the topic this week is supply chain benchmarking. What is it? Why do we do it? And how do we do it? Coming right up. So let me ask you a question. Have you been involved in benchmarking any aspect of your supply chain logistics operation? I asked this question recently on a webinar and about only 30% said yes, and I was surprised. So let me tell you why I think it's an essential thing to do in your supply chain. And we're going to answer three questions. What is it? Why do it? And how to do it? And in fact, I'll try to remember, but I will put a link to a recent webinar down below where we spend an hour talking about this. I just want to give you a summary at this point. So what is benchmarking? I'm looking for a tape measure. There we go, I've got a tape measure. A benchmark is an old sort of woodworking term, I think, where you would literally put a mark on the bench, and if you're cutting bits of wood, you basically could measure every bit of wood you're cutting against that, so it all come out the same. So it's a benchmark. And what does it mean in terms of business? What a benchmark is in business, it's a measure of performance so that we can start to track over time how our performance is going and ideally how it compares to others. So there's a great question that we asked on the webinar on benchmarking. And the question was, if you want to be the best at something, let's say you want to be the best 100-meter sprinter, what's the thing that you need to know? What's the one bit of information that's critical to know? And we got a lot of different answers, but the key answer is, how fast is the fastest person? And benchmarking is a little bit like that, because we use supply chain benchmarking, any sort of business benchmarking, to rate our performance against the performance of others. And we're generally doing that, the why, so that we understand the gap in performance and what we need to do to lift our game, to improve our performance, to be nearer the best. So in that example with the 100-meter runner, I'm not sure who the fastest one is at the moment, it's probably still Usain Bolt. If I want to be the fastest 100-meter sprinter, I've got to beat that number. Think about your business. You might be looking after a complete supply chain. You might be looking after transport operations. You might be looking after warehousing. What would be kind of world-class pick rates for your warehouse? What are your competitors doing? What are other people in your industry doing? That's the whole purpose of supply chain benchmarking. And we talk on the webinar, there was a great little case study about an automotive parts company who were doing picks of 15 lines an hour, and they thought they were doing really well. And then we showed them that actually, I think the industry average was 30, and then through a process of benchmarking and performance improvement, they got up to about 50. So it is recognized as probably one of the best management tools out there, benchmarking. Find out what your current performance is, tick. Find out what the performance is like in your industry. And are you below that, above that, tick. And then start to identify the gaps in performance, and then you can work out how you're going to close that gap and improve. That, in a nutshell, is supply chain benchmarking. The tricky thing with benchmarking is always coming up with the external benchmarks. So if you're working in a very large business, let's say, for example, you're benchmarking warehouse performance, maybe you have a whole bunch of different warehouses in the business and you can benchmark against each other. And you could say, wow, this one's doing really well. What are you doing differently? What do your processes look like? How do they differ from ours? And maybe we can use that as a best practice model. So that's a really good way to start. Ideally, if you want to really use benchmarking effectively, you've got to look externally, and you've got to try and find some metrics on other businesses in your industry, maybe internationally, what are the best-in-class companies doing, and that's where you can really stretch and do a lot better. And we talk about that on the webinar as well. So if benchmarking is of interest to you, check out the webinar. There's lots of other videos on the channel, I think, about benchmarking and performance measurement generally, but it's a critical part of supply chain management, I think. KPIs, there's lots of stuff about that on the channel. It's something that if you're serious about really high-performing supply chains, you need to get your head around, KPIs and benchmarking. So thanks for watching this week. If you've got any questions or comments on benchmarking, do comment down below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next week. And if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell, and that way you'll be notified every time we have a new video coming out. And I must remember to put that webinar link down below. See you next week.